And I think that's just another good reminder that, if you only have one game in town, you've got to be quite careful.
Hello from Mannheim. We're here at the Fonds Professionnel Congress, and with me is Mortimer von Guinness. Hello.
Welcome here.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, you're managing an innovation fund. Innovation means a lot for a lot of people. Tech. We had like the tech bubble burst maybe with NVIDIA in the last couple of days. What's your opinion on this shocking moment for the markets?
Yeah, I think we would take a slightly more longer-term view. I think you're right, that it was big news. Clearly, we saw very big moves in the markets on Monday. We've seen a bit of a recovery in the next few days. And, if you look at today, ASML in Europe had very positive results. I think that's kind of buoyed sentiment. And I think the market is really just trying to digest what it all means. And I think we're in a similar boat. And I think a better way to describe it is rather than a kind of a bubble bursting, because I think you'd have to question, one, whether it was a bubble. And then two, I think more questionable is as it bursts, just based on this small news. But I think really what it is a sort of the market narrative has been very singular. That NVIDIA would be the winner, it's chips, data centers, and it's a very sort of straight line kind of growth prospect. And I think what this has done to do is sort of show that actually that kind of probability distribution of outcomes has maybe widened. And I think that's probably a good thing, ultimately. And we've seen that time and time again in markets where there's a singular narrative. It doesn't take much for sentiment to shift quite quickly to kind of adapt that. And I think that's kind of what we've seen. I think kind of big picture, we have some exposure to, these types of names in the portfolio. And I think if we were saying, does this completely dampen the demand for AI going forward? I'd say the answer is no. I think there's a counter argument to be made that there'd be a sort of greater proliferation more quickly of some of these tools as they become more efficient and cheaper to use. And if that does happen, that probably creates more demand. So I think in the longer term, I think the general demand picture and use cases, I think, remain similar. But potentially some of the areas such as, some of the nuclear power type companies, some like gas turbine companies, more utilities that are exposed to that kind of build out and electrification of data centers is being potentially more challenged. And I think there's sort of areas where you say that's got a bit too far relative to the actual growth opportunities and their business model. But in terms of the portfolio, I don't think we'll be making any kind of direct changes very quickly.
Would you say DeepSeek is a real threat for the US companies, or is it just like, let's say, a minor threat?
I think it's to be seen. I think, in terms of the kind of the very technical nature of it, we're not experts in building large language models. But clearly from what we're hearing from other people saying, it has been a good breakthrough. And it seems to be, on the face of it, by the way, I think there's still kind of question marks a little bit around it, that this is a big step forward. And I think, as I said before, you could see that as quite a positive thing in the sense that if it is true that the cost of compute is decreasing, if inference can be done, on devices and so forth that don't require quite so much technically advanced chips and so forth, then actually, you can see kind of the software companies did really well. So things like Salesforce rallied because the market was saying, well, actually, if these things are going to be cheaper and they're going to happen sooner, then actually they're going to be able to make more use for it. If they make more use for it, that's probably better for their margins, for example, and their business model. So I think what we've seen really is a bit of a shift in terms of, I think, how quick some of these things might be starting to be used, how quickly they could proliferate. And then also at the margins, some of those companies, like I mentioned before, which ones are going to be the direct winners and which ones aren't. And I think there's just a little bit of a shuffling of the pack in terms of what market expectations are. And I think, it's been ever thus. We've seen this in many other cases with different themes and trends. And so in our portfolio, we do have exposure to AI, cloud computing. We've also got kind of a diversification across lots of other areas like financials and healthcare and so forth. And I think that's just another good reminder that, if you only have one game in town, you've got to be quite careful.
Another big name is Netflix. The company is back, or the stock is back in your portfolio. Why is that the case?
Yeah, so Netflix is a company we originally owned in 2007 in the portfolio. So when we first bought it, it was actually kind of DVDs in the post office. So it was a pretty different beast. It actually went up 10 times until 2011 when we sold it. And the reason we sold it around that time was actually it was doing its first move into outside of the US into Europe. We felt that costs would go up, margins would come down, and they're spending a lot of money to achieve that. And ultimately that happened. It then had a very strong run where, in hindsight, we wish we could have maybe bought it back, but the valuation levels are much higher during those types of periods. It then obviously suffered as we saw kind of increased competition. But what we then more recently, in the last sort of, we bought it at the middle of last year, saw was a bit of a step change. They were going back in terms of the valuation on offer seemed more attractive. And I think you could start to see, that competitive threat start to drift away a little bit. It's very expensive to compete with them. I think their moat was increasing. And then clearly what they were doing really successfully was that change from the subscription models, increasing, ad spend models. And you could see how their cash flows could start to regrow. And you can see that inflection point. And that's something we thought would be really attractive. And pleasingly, that's been a really good decision.
Thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.